All right. This is the Comp 431 extra credit project with Logan, Patico, Alex Aguero, and Brian de la Cruz. So to start off, we began by polling or by pinging National University of Singapore at www.nus.edu.sg. The IP address is also listed there, and this was the server that we pinged in Asia. So to start off, we have the traceroute. Just for efficiency, because every time, while a traceroute was conducted, every time before each trial, that traceroute turned out to be the same. The same IP addresses were pinged for each trial throughout the traceroute. So it's only been added once. What's interesting here is that it starts off here at UNC's campus and then travels throughout the United States, ending here at in Kansas before then entering Singapore down here, and we'll discuss that more later. However, to move into the first trial, we have trial 1, which was conducted at 7:30 a.m. There were 60 packets transmitted and 60 received with 0% packet loss. I'd like to draw attention to the rather sporadic the curvature of this graph. It varies between about 250 milliseconds to about 350 milliseconds throughout this entire trial, and we'll see a bit more of that later. However, it's important to remember that in Singapore, there's a 12-hour difference. So while it may be 7:30 a.m. here, and there might not be a lot of people using this UNC network, at 7:30 p.m. there could be quite the opposite. So here at 10:45 a.m. we still have the same sort of large difference, even though it could be argued that not as many people at NUS are using the campus network. There are certainly a large number here at UNC using it, which would explain why you would see such large discrepancies. So there are, again, 60 packets that were transmitted, 60 that were received, and 0% packet loss throughout this time. Moving into trial 3, you again have that large difference between that large range of time in transmitting, with the exception of this one right here, around I guess that would be trial 36 or 37, or ping 36 or 37. They all sort of fall within a smaller range of about 275 to roughly 350. So the range is getting smaller right before you go into trial 4, which was conducted at 7:34 p.m. That was pretty much a straight line, with the exception of this outlier here in the middle. There was very little difference in the range. And this could be argued to be because this is at a specific point when traffic both at UNC and NUS campus would be comparatively lower than in the previous times. Again, we have trial 5. We see that sort of difference starts to pick up again. Still, again, seeing 60 packets transmitted, 60 received, and 0% packet loss. At no point was there ever any packet loss when pinging these areas, or when pinging NUS University. So now to get into a bit more about why we see these sort of discrepancies, it's important to look at the first trial 1 ping to UNC, for example. So this was conducted at 7:30 a.m. Eastern time, and here you can sort of see a pretty large difference between the individual pings to just the UNC server. So here you can see something that was, taken, roughly 6 milliseconds, excuse me, all the way down here to 36 milliseconds. But then here for trial 5 to the ping to UNC, it drops down again, and so there's a relatively small difference in the ping, and so this was conducted at 10 p.m. at night, and so it could be argued that there were far fewer people on campus that were actually doing this. And so moving forward to the trial one, ping to campus, Kansas, which is, it's important to remember that Kansas was the final trial before the final server that was pinged before going to Singapore. And so what's important to recognize here, what this can tell us is if we see a lot of that, the large difference in range during like we did with trial one. However, here it looks as though they are relatively consistent. It can actually, or excuse me, they're not as consistent. Here you can see at 75 and then down to 66. Again, going down here up as far as 85, so a 20 millisecond difference. This largely shows that that difference already existed before we were already in Singapore, whereas with trial 5, just before Singapore, you can see that it hovers sort of around 69, never really going up into 80, except with the exception of this outlier here. It's much smaller. And so you can see that difference is largely a result of Singapore in some ways.
I took the next one with pinging out on the West Coast to the East Los Angeles College. That is the IP address. Starting off with the first trace route in the morning. With this table, we have the minimum ping round trip time, the maximum, the average, and any packet loss. Also over here we have the amount of routers that have been used. And as we'll see as a common trope is that router 17 is never picked up in any of the 5 trials, and all packets never make it, or I never have a router for number 17. But starting off with this, we see that these are sort of relatively close to the UNC campus with very minimal time, with a very high latency, but the average stays pretty consistent, at which point, moving on to this graph, we can see that it's a low ping time, then between 7 and 11, that tends to increase, with routers 12 to 18 being sort of having the relatively same amount of time passing by them. As also we can see is router 7 to about 13 are relatively near one another from their IP addresses. Moving on to the second trace route, we have a higher packet loss with as high as 6% packets lost within this router. However, with a little bit of a more sporadic maximum round trip time, this graph shows that there is still it's very close to the first ping trial shown here, with router 17 having more traffic than usual. The third trace route with the third trial, we have gotten to a lowered packet loss rate, higher ping times. However, within the average, we see that this is still very much within the swinging range of the previous 2 trials, with higher round trip times overall. Within the fourth trace route, we have yet again lower packet loss rates, with still router 17 having no data whatsoever. I don't have an IP for it. It's a little more sporadic with router 12 having the largest round trip time, but still being within this slight uh, straight line, a small increase in time, but then leveling out at the end once more. And then lastly, this is the fifth trace route, taking in all routers have a 0% packet loss rate. The routers are all accounted for, as well as, once again, the graph shows that it has an extremely consistent ping rate with there being very little variance. I took the standard deviation from from all previous graphs, tables, and I conducted a coefficient of variance, and at most there was a zero point 0.7 variance, in which case the coefficient of variance shows that anything below a 1 shows a tight grouping of data points, meaning that even within all the various maximum round trip times, the average round trip time throughout all 5 trials to the East Los Angeles College maintained a tight grouping with the later routers 17 to 18 had a 0.01 variance CV, meaning that at most the variance between it is within 2 to 3 milliseconds of the previous, which could be from different latencies. But overall, the ping trials towards the East College of Los Angeles from UNC is extremely consistent during any time of day, and there is sort of no variance to that really.
And so for the last experiment, we did twitter.com. For each trial, the route was pretty much the same every time, except for minor differences in IP, which are these 3 right here. But otherwise, they pretty much looked exactly like this. So in summary, 1 through 3 seem to be based in Chapel Hill, 4 is based in Durham, and the rest I wasn't really sure where they were located. It varied from Virginia to Michigan to Seattle, so I couldn't really pinpoint them, but this is basically the structure of what each trace route looks like. So for the first trial at 8:30 a.m., it has the highest total maximum round trip time, so the cumulative total of every maximum across each router pinged. And it's also barely second for minimum and average total round trip time, so the cumulative of each minimum and average for each router. And routers 1 and 7 spike dramatically in their maximum round trip time, but as you'll see throughout the rest of this, that's pretty common among each trial. At 11:25 a.m., routers 2 and 7, their maximum round trip time decreases. So router 2 and router 7 here. Router 7 becomes about half of what it was before. 11 and 12, their maximum round trip time increases very slightly in comparison to everything else, but a bit large in their own rights. And router 12, its minimum and average also increase. At 3:30 p.m., router 8 decreases dramatically in its overall round trip time, so for minimum, average, and maximum. It was about more than double of this before. And 1 also decreases in its maximum round trip time, again, less than half of what it was before. Routers 2 and 7 increase a lot in their maximum round trip time, and overall, the progression of round trip times across all routers becomes a bit more linear. Before it wasn't quite so linear, it would kind of drop off towards the end here. At 7:20 p.m., it has the highest total average round trip time of all trials. So the round trip times of 1 through 8 increase. 8 is back to its staggeringly high size that it was before, while the round trip times of 9 through 12 decrease in general. And yeah, routers 1 through 8 go about back to what they were before. And finally, at 3 a.m., the round trip times are shortest overall, maybe because there's less traffic at this time. So 8 becomes extremely short again. 1 and 7, their maximum round trip times decrease again. For For some reason, the maximum round trip times for 2, 3, 11, and 12 increase, while their averages tend to be about the same or less than what they were before. So yeah, some final thoughts. I didn't see any packet loss in any of the trials. I sent 1,000 packets per ping for each server, but I never got a packet loss of more than 0% back. Maybe it's because it rounds the result to the nearest percent, so for instance, a packet loss of 0.4 would just become 0. But in any case, it means that there's low packet loss, which is good. I also noticed some variability in IPs at the latter end of the route, and the reason that I came up with that is maybe because there's different systems operating in like one locale. So there's, for instance, there'd be multiple servers at 104.244.42. Whatever. And yeah, it would often differ at the final hop and the 3 hops before that. And finally, variability in round trip time for this IP, which was router 8. So the minimum, maximum, and average round trip time were always close, but depending on the time of day, it would vary vary greatly. So for instance, it would be like 150 milliseconds round trip time versus like 60 at a different time of day. And yeah, that's about it.